From the very beginning, I knew marrying into Daniel's family would come with its challenges. Boston's old money families rarely welcome outsiders with open arms, especially those who come from the wrong side of Cambridge like me. But I never imagined just how deep the resentment would run. Daniel and I met at a charity gala where I was working as an event coordinator. He was charming, attentive, and seemed refreshingly different from his stuffy relatives. 6 months later, he proposed, and despite the warning looks from my friends who knew about the Prescott family's reputation, I said yes. His mother, Lorraine, was the epitome of New England aristocracy. Pearl necklaces, tennis club memberships, and that thin-lipped smile that never quite reached her eyes. From our first meeting at the Prescott summer home in Martha's Vineyard, she looked at me with barely concealed disdain. "Sarah, dear," she'd say, examining my outfit with a critical eye. "How innovative of you to pair those shoes with that dress." Her comments always carried that double edge. Technically compliments, but laced with something sharp underneath. I tried everything to win her approval. I volunteered for her beloved Boston Symphony Orchestra fundraisers. I learned to make her family's traditional Christmas pudding recipe. I even took sailing lessons so I wouldn't embarrass Daniel during the annual Prescott Regatta. Nothing worked. I was never going to be good enough because I wasn't born into their world. Daniel would brush off my concerns. "Mom's just set in her ways," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "She'll come around eventually." But 3 years into our marriage, eventually, still hadn't arrived. What really seemed to bother Lorraine most was my independence. I had bought my brownstone in Beacon Hill with money I'd saved from years of working 60-hour weeks and smart investments. The place needed work when I purchased it, but I had lovingly restored it room by room until it became my sanctuary. This was long before Daniel and I were married, yet somehow, in Lorraine's mind, it should have been considered a shared family asset. "I just don't understand why you insist on keeping it in only your name," she'd comment during Sunday dinners at their sprawling Back Bay mansion. The Prescotts have always pooled resources. Family properties circulate where they're needed most. I'd smile politely and change the subject, but it was clear what she wanted. In her world, my house should have automatically become available for any family member who might need it. The tension escalated after her daughter, Melanie, graduated from Wellesley College. Melanie was the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, and wholly devoted to pleasing her mother. Unlike Daniel, who occasionally showed flashes of independence, Melanie had been molded perfectly in Lorraine's image. At first, the hints were subtle. "Poor Melanie is looking at apartments in Somerville," Lorraine would sigh dramatically at family gatherings. "Student loans are such a burden these days." Then came the more pointed comments. "A real sister would help Melanie start her life," she'd say within my earshot. "How shameful that she has to rent a tiny apartment when her brother's wife has a whole house to herself." I tried to stay civil, brushing off the jabs and refusing to stoop to her level. "Melanie is welcome to visit any time," I'd respond, knowing full well that wasn't what she meant. Daniel remained frustratingly neutral, caught between his mother's expectations and his wife's boundaries. "Just ignore her," he'd whisper when tensions rose. "You know how she gets." But I couldn't ignore the growing coldness from the entire family. Cousins who had once been friendly became distant. Invitations to smaller family gatherings dwindled. I was being frozen out, punished for not surrendering what was mine. One evening, after a particularly uncomfortable dinner where Lorraine had mentioned how selfish young people are today, I confronted Daniel in our bedroom. "Your mother wants me to give my house to Melanie," I said plainly, "and you're letting her pressure me." Daniel ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd once found endearing. "She doesn't mean it like that. Mom just thinks family should help family." "Family doesn't manipulate family," I countered. "And this isn't about helping, it's about taking something that's mine." He sighed, looking torn. "Can't we just consider it? Maybe we could let Melanie stay there for a year or two?" We don't even use the place much anymore." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting Lorraine. I was fighting my husband too. The brownstone wasn't just a piece of property. It represented everything I'd achieved on my own, my independence, my identity outside the Prescott bubble. The final straw came on a bright Sunday morning in May. Lorraine invited us for brunch at Beacon Hill Bistro, under the pretense of a family celebration for Melanie's new job at a prestigious law firm. The location wasn't accidental. It was just 2 blocks from my brownstone, a not-so-subtle reminder of what they wanted. I already had a feeling something was coming, but I didn't expect it to explode the way it did. As I dressed that morning, carefully selecting a blue dress that Lorraine had once complimented, a rare occurrence, I had no idea I was preparing for a battlefield, not a brunch. Daniel seemed nervous on the drive over, checking his phone repeatedly and avoiding my eyes. Looking back, I should have recognized the signs. He knew what was coming. The brunch had a staged feel from the start. Walking into Beacon Hill Bistro, I immediately sensed something was off. The hostess led us to a private dining area in the back where the Prescott family had already gathered. Everyone sat around a large table draped in crisp white linen, smiling, in that plastic way that barely masked their condescension. Melanie was seated at the head of the table, a position usually reserved for Lorraine. She wore a pale pink suit that looked fresh off a Newberry Street rack, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Daniel's cousins James and Patricia were there with their spouses, along with his Aunt Eleanor, who never missed an opportunity to remind me that her late husband had been a state senator. "Sarah, how lovely you could join us," Lorraine called out with theatrical warmth. She wore her signature pearl necklace and a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Sit right here, dear." She patted the seat directly, across from her, positioning me like a chess piece. Daniel took the chair beside me, his knee bouncing nervously under the table. The waitstaff poured mimosas and coffee as Lorraine orchestrated the conversation, making sure everyone knew about Melanie's new position at Caldwell & Rowe, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. "Starting salary is impressive," she announced, as if discussing the weather. "But Boston's rental market is just impossible these days, even with what they're paying her." Several family members nodded sympathetically, their eyes darting briefly toward me. I sipped my coffee, already understanding where this was heading. "Remember how we all helped James when he was starting his practice?" Lorraine continued. "The Prescott family tradition of supporting our rising stars is something I've always been proud of." I felt Daniel tense beside me. He reached for his water glass, avoiding my eyes. Brunch arrived, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, and pastries arranged with artistic precision on delicate china plates. I barely tasted any of it. The conversation flowed around me, focused entirely on Melanie's achievements and future prospects. After the main course was cleared, Lorraine raised her glass. "A toast," she announced, commanding everyone's attention. "To Melanie, the pride of our family, top of her class at Wellesley, accepted to every law school she applied to, and now beginning what I know will be a remarkable career." Everyone raised their glasses. "To Melanie," they echoed. "And now," Lorraine continued, turning to face me, directly, her smile tightening at the corners, "we come to the real purpose of our gathering today." She set down her glass and picked up her coffee cup, holding it with perfect poise. "Sarah, you have an opportunity to truly become part of this family by supporting Melanie the way Prescotts have always supported each other." The table fell, silent. Even the ambient restaurant noise seemed to fade away. "I don't understand," I said, though I did, perfectly. "Your house on Myrtle Street," Lorraine said, speaking slowly as if to a child. "It's just sitting there half the time while you and Daniel live in your Cambridge apartment. The best gift you could give our shining star is a new beginning, by handing over your house to her." I felt the blood drain from my face. Despite anticipating something like this, hearing it stated so boldly, so entitledly, was different. "That house was my investment," I said carefully. I bought it years before I met Daniel. It's not a family asset." Lorraine's eyebrows arched. "Not a family asset? My dear, when you married my son, you became part of a legacy. Prescotts don't maintain separate properties when family members are in need." "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I understand you want to help Melanie, but that house represents years of my hard work. I'm not comfortable giving it away." The table erupted in murmurs. Melanie's eyes glistened with tears. Whether genuine or calculated, I couldn't tell. "Not comfortable?" Lorraine's voice rose slightly. "This isn't about comfort. This is about duty. Family duty." "The house is in my name," I replied. "It's not for me to just hand over." Daniel finally spoke, his voice strained. "Sarah, maybe we could consider some kind of arrangement. Perhaps Melanie could rent it at a reduced rate." I turned to look at him, stunned by his betrayal. "You knew about this ambush?" His silence was answer enough. "This is ridiculous," I said, setting down my napkin. "I'm not giving away my property because you feel entitled to it." That's when I felt it, the scalding splash of hot coffee hitting my face and chest. Lorraine had flung the contents of her cup directly at me, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful, selfish witch," she screamed, all pretense of refinement evaporating. "After everything this family has done for you." The pain was immediate and shocking. Coffee soaked through my blue dress, burning my skin. Gasps filled the room, but no one moved to help me. I grabbed my napkin and dabbed at my face, feeling the heat of both the coffee and humiliation. "What has this family done for me exactly?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm despite the pain. "Looked down on me? Treated me like an outsider? Tried to take what's mine? How dare you?" Lorraine stood now, trembling with fury. "Daniel, are you going to let her speak to me this way?" All eyes turned to my husband. This was his moment to stand up for me, to be the partner I thought I had married. Instead, he stared at his plate, saying nothing. "You need to leave this restaurant immediately," Lorraine commanded, pointing at the door. "You have no place in this family if you can't understand our values." I wiped my face slowly, feeling the skin already beginning to blister. I set down my napkin and looked her directly in the eye. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply said, "Okay," and walked out. The cool May air hit my damp clothes as I stepped onto Charles Street. My face throbbed, and pedestrians cast curious glances at my coffee-stained dress. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address, grateful he didn't ask questions about my appearance. As the taxi wove through Sunday traffic, I stared out the window at the city I'd called home for 12 years. The brownstone townhouses of Beacon Hill gave way to the wider streets of Back Bay. Boston had always represented possibility to me, a place where a girl from a working-class family in Dorchester could create her own success. Now that same success had made me a target. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Daniel. "Where did you go?" "Mom's really upset. We need to talk about this reasonably." I turned off my phone and leaned back against the seat. What no one at that table knew was that while they were planning their little ambush, I had been quietly preparing something of my own. Their attempt to humiliate me into submission had only confirmed what I needed to do next. When the cab pulled up to my brownstone, I paid the driver and added a generous tip. "Tough day?" he asked, finally acknowledging my disheveled state. "Just family brunch," I replied with a wry smile. "Nothing I can't handle." The irony wasn't lost on me as I climbed the steps to my front door. The very house they were trying to take from me would now become my fortress against them. I inserted my key into the lock, already mentally preparing for what would come next. I packed my things that very evening. The skin on my chest and neck still burned from the coffee, leaving angry red patches that would later blister. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, carefully applying aloe vera gel to the worst spots, and wondering how things had spiraled so quickly. But I wasn't defeated. Far from it. I knew the war had just begun. My movements were methodical, almost calm. I pulled out my largest suitcase from the closet and filled it with clothes, toiletries, and personal items. I gathered important documents: birth, certificate, passport, insurance papers, and placed them in my leather portfolio. The framed photo of Daniel and me on Cape Cod, taken during happier days, I left on the nightstand. It no longer belonged with my things. The brownstone felt different now, tainted by Lorraine's demands and Daniel's betrayal. Each room held memories that suddenly seemed hollow. Dinner parties with friends who had warned me about the Prescotts. Quiet Sunday mornings reading in the window seat, the renovations I'd lovingly overseen room by room. This house represented everything I'd worked for, but now it had become something else. A battlefield. I called Madison, my oldest friend from Emerson College, who lived in a converted factory building in the South End. "Sarah, what's wrong?" she asked, immediately sensing the tension in my voice. "Remember when you said the Prescotts would show their true colors eventually?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, today Lorraine threw hot coffee in my face and demanded I give my house to Melanie." "Jesus Christ," Madison gasped. "Are you okay? Do you need to go to the hospital?" "I'm fine." "Well, not fine, but I don't need medical attention." I took a deep breath. "What I need is a place to stay for a few days while I figure things out. Pack your stuff. You're coming here. No arguments." 2 hours later, I was settled in Madison's guest room. Her loft was everything the Prescott homes weren't: eclectic, artistic, and unpretentious. Abstract canvases hung on exposed brick walls, and mismatched furniture somehow came together perfectly. Madison worked as a curator at a small gallery in Fort Point, and her home reflected her creative eye. "Have you heard from Daniel?" she asked, handing me a glass of wine as we sat at her kitchen island. I checked my phone. 15 missed calls and 23 text messages, all from Daniel. I hadn't read any of them. "He's been trying to reach me. I'm not ready to talk to him yet." Madison's eyes narrowed. "What did he do when his mother assaulted you?" "Nothing," I said, the word hanging heavily between us. "Absolutely nothing." "Then he doesn't deserve to hear from you," she said firmly. "What's your next move?" I took a sip of wine. "I've actually been planning for something like this for a while." Madison raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The truth was, I'd sensed the direction things were heading months ago. The increasing pressure about the house, the not-so-subtle inquiries about property rights, the way Daniel had started bringing up the idea of shared family resources. I wasn't naive, and I certainly wasn't unprepared. 3 months ago, I transferred the house to a trust under my name, I explained. It was something my financial advisor suggested when I mentioned Lorraine's behavior. The deed is no longer in my hands, but in legal safekeeping. Madison let out a low whistle. "So even if Daniel tried to make a claim..." "He can't," I finished. "Neither can any of the Prescotts. It's protected." For the first time since the brunch, I felt a small smile forming. Not from vindictiveness, but from the simple satisfaction of having protected myself. The silence in Madison's loft felt like freedom rather than exile. No judgmental glances, no underhanded comments, no walking on eggshells. I slept better that night than I had in months, despite the pain from my burns. Daniel didn't come looking for me. Not that day, not the next. His texts gradually changed from defensive, "Mom was just upset," to pleading, "Please come home so we can talk," to accusatory, "You're tearing the family apart." The man I thought I knew, the one I had fallen in love with at that charity gala, years ago, was nowhere in those messages. The silence from him hurt the most, but it confirmed what I had feared for a long time. I had been standing alone in that marriage for far too long. On Tuesday, I met with Alan Gershwin, my attorney. His office overlooked the Charles River, the morning sun glinting off the water as rowers glided by in long, sleek boats. "Coffee?" he offered as I sat across from his desk. I winced involuntarily. "No, thank you. Just water." Alan was in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses that perpetually sat at the tip of his nose. He'd been my advisor since I bought the brownstone, helping me navigate the complexities of Boston real estate. "So," he said, folding his hands on his desk, "I understand there's been an escalation with your in-laws." I gave him a condensed version of Sunday's events, trying to keep emotion out of the retelling. When I mentioned the coffee incident, his eyebrows shot up, but he let me finish without interruption. "That's assault," he said simply when I was done. "Have you considered pressing charges?" I shook my head. "I don't want to go that route unless absolutely necessary. What I want is for them to back off, completely." "And Daniel? Where does he stand in all this?" "Squarely with his mother, it seems." The words tasted bitter. Alan nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to be proactive. The trust was a smart move, but we should consider additional steps." He pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. "A formal cease and desist letter would establish a paper trail if things escalate further." "I want it sent to all of them," I said firmly. "Not just Lorraine." In the quiet of Alan's office, I drafted the letter with his guidance. It was carefully worded, legally airtight, and undeniably final. No anger, no insults, just the cold truth of their own actions, and the consequences they had failed to foresee. The following days passed in a strange limbo. I took a week off from my job at the marketing firm where I worked as a creative director, explaining to my understanding boss that I was dealing with family issues. Madison's loft became my sanctuary as I began looking for a more permanent place. I found a small but modern apartment in the Seaport district, as far from Beacon Hill as I could get while still being in Boston proper. The glass and steel building had none of the historical charm of my brownstone, but that was precisely what I needed, something completely different, without memories lurking in every corner. On Friday, 1 week after the infamous brunch, I sent the letter, not just to Lorraine, but to everyone who had sat there in silence during that confrontation. The delivery was scheduled for Monday morning, giving me the weekend to settle into my new place and prepare for whatever fallout might come. Madison helped me move the essentials to the Seaport apartment. As we unpacked boxes in my new living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, she paused. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" "Not the letter. That's absolutely the right move. But this." She gestured around. "Starting over." I placed a framed photograph of my parents on the shelf. My father in his postal worker uniform, my mother in her nurse's scrubs. They had taught me resilience long before I knew what the word meant. "I'm not starting over," I said, suddenly certain. "I'm just continuing on my own terms." That night, in my half-furnished apartment with boxes still unopened, I slept without dreams. The city lights reflected on the water outside my window, constantly shifting, never static. Like me. The letter arrived on Monday morning, right on schedule. From my new apartment, I could almost picture the scene at the Prescott home in Back Bay. Lorraine, always an early riser, would be sitting at her antique mahogany breakfast table, sipping her Earl Grey tea from bone china that had been in the family for generations. The mail would arrive promptly at 9, sorted by their housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, who had been with the family since Daniel was a child. I imagined Lorraine gathering everyone in the formal living room, the one with the Persian rugs and oil, paintings of stern-faced Prescott ancestors. She would summon Daniel, who was probably staying there since I left. Melanie would be called over from her temporary apartment in Brookline. Perhaps even Aunt Eleanor would be invited to witness what Lorraine surely expected to be her moment of triumph. In her mind, She would be opening an envelope containing the keys to my brownstone, handed over like a crown to the rightful heir. She would be preparing a little speech about family legacy and proper respect for tradition. Melanie would be mentally redecorating already, planning to replace my carefully selected furnishings with whatever matched her mother's taste. Instead, she opened the envelope and found a neatly typed message with a legal attachment. No keys, no deed, just cold reality. My phone buzzed at 9:47 a.m. A text from Carol, a friend who taught piano to Lorraine's niece and was often at the Prescott home. Something big just happened at the Prescott place. Lorraine looked like she saw a ghost. Everyone's freaking out. You okay? I simply replied, better than okay. Thanks for checking in. The letter had been crafted meticulously with Alan's help. The opening paragraph was cordial but firm, acknowledging receipt of their request regarding my property on Myrtle Street. The second paragraph explained that the house was no longer available for use or transfer, having been placed in a private trust months earlier. The third paragraph was the kicker, the part that would have caused Lorraine's perfectly powdered face to drain of color. It detailed that due to her public harassment and attempted coercion, including the physical assault involving hot coffee at Beacon Hill Bistro on May 15th, she was being served with a cease and desist order. Any further communication regarding the property or any contact with me whatsoever would need to go through legal channels. The attachment included a detailed record of the trust, legal documentation of the property transfer, and a statement from Alan warning against any attempts to circumvent the order. At the very end was a scan of the incident report I'd filed with the Boston Police Department regarding the coffee assault, complete with photographs of my burns and statements from 2 witnesses, the busboy who had helped clean me up and a shocked patron at a nearby table. I hadn't planned to file a police report initially, but Alan had insisted. Not necessarily to press charges, he'd explained, but to establish a record, evidence. By noon, my phone was exploding with notifications. The first was from Daniel, i.e. a series of frantic texts. What the hell, Sarah? A cease and desist? Against my mother? You need to call this off right now. I didn't respond. Melanie tried next, her message dripping with the fake sweetness she'd perfected over years. Sarah, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. I never asked for your house. This is all getting out of hand. We're family. Can't we talk about this? Delete. Even James and Patricia, Daniel's cousins who had sat silently during the brunch debacle, sent messages expressing their concern about the family situation. Apparently, I was tearing apart a dynasty. By mid-afternoon, my lawyer called. The Prescott's attorney reached out, Alan said, a hint of amusement in his voice. They're suggesting a family mediation. And what did you tell them? That my client is not interested in mediation at this time, and that all future communication should adhere to the cease and desist parameters. I smiled, looking out at the harbor from my new apartment. Perfect. Later that evening, Madison came over with takeout from our favorite Thai place on Boylston Street. We sat cross-legged on my still bare living room floor, eating pad thai and spring rolls directly from the containers. So, she said, pouring us each a glass of wine. How does it feel to stand up to Boston's elite? I considered the question, watching the sunset paint the harbor waters in shades of orange and pink. Lighter than I expected, I finally answered, like putting down something heavy I didn't realize I was carrying. I heard from Tom that Lorraine had to cancel the garden club luncheon she was hosting tomorrow, Madison said, referring to her brother who worked as a caterer for many of Boston's high society events. Apparently, she's indisposed. Shame, I said, not feeling remotely sorry. And Melanie was seen crying at Tata Bakery on Charles Street, very publicly, very dramatically. I took a sip of wine. Lorraine taught her well. Everything's a performance. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside. Finally, Madison asked the question I'd been waiting for. Have you decided about Daniel? Had I? The hurt was still raw, not just from his silence during the coffee incident, but from years of his fence-sitting, his refusal to stand up for me, his quiet reinforcement of his family's entitlement. The man I married had slowly disappeared, replaced by someone who resembled his mother more each day. I started, then paused. I think he made his choice a long time ago. He just didn't tell me. Madison reached over and squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I think you're right. Later that night, I sat on my new balcony, wrapped in a blanket against the cool harbor breeze. Below, the city continued its nightly rhythm. Couples walking hand in hand along the waterfront, lights from restaurants spilling onto the sidewalks, water taxis shuttling late-night passengers. My phone lit up with yet another call from Daniel. This time I answered. Sarah, thank God. He rushed out before I could speak. We need to talk about this. Mom's absolutely devastated. This legal stuff, it's going too far. Hello to you? Too, I said calmly. How are my burns? Thanks for asking. A brief silence. I know Mom went overboard at brunch. She's really sorry. Is she? Because I haven't received any apology. She's too upset right now, he defended. This cease and desist thing has her completely accountable, I finished for him. It has her completely accountable. Another pause. Where are you? He finally asked. I came by Madison's, but she wouldn't tell me. I've moved, I said simply. Moved, just like that, without talking to me? The indignation in his voice was almost laughable. Just like you talked to me before ambushing me about giving away my house? That's different, he sputtered. It's really not, Daniel. I took a deep breath. I need to go. If you want to discuss anything further, you can contact Alan. His information was in the letter. Sarah, please. I ended the call, turned off my phone, and looked back out at the harbor. The water rippled with reflections of city lights, endlessly shifting and reconfiguring, never the same twice. Something about that felt right for where I found myself. Everything had changed, yet somehow I was more myself than I had been in years. In the days that followed, I experienced what I can only describe as a strange new power dynamic. After years of feeling like I was constantly swimming upstream against the Prescott current, suddenly the river had changed direction. The first shift came in the form of a formal letter from Lorraine's personal attorney, Gregory Whitman, an old Harvard classmate of her late husband's. The letter was stiff and clearly written under duress, expressing regret for recent unfortunate events and requesting that I reconsider the legal measures that had been taken. What it noticeably lacked was any actual admission of wrongdoing or genuine apology. Classic Prescott non-apology, I told Alan over lunch at Pastoral in Fort Point, sliding the letter across the table. Acknowledging something happened without accepting responsibility. Alan adjusted his reading glasses as he scanned the document. They're testing the waters, he said, handing it back, seeing if you'll back down with minimal effort on their part. And if I don't, then they'll escalate or retreat. My money's on retreat. They have more to lose than you do if this becomes public. He was right. The Prescotts' social standing in Boston society depended on their carefully cultivated image. A lawsuit involving assault and harassment would be scandalous, especially with Melanie just beginning her career at a prestigious law firm. Even without pressing charges, the threat of exposure was a powerful card in my hand. I drafted a brief response with Alan's guidance, reiterating that the cease and desist remained in effect and that any further communication should follow proper legal channels. We made no mention of the inadequate apology or any willingness to negotiate. Taimelam. Back in their court. My phone continued to fill with messages, first angry, then pleading. Lorraine claimed she had lost control, that it was just heat of the moment. Melanie insisted she didn't ask for the house and that she was being unfairly punished for her mother's actions. Daniel cycled between rage and reconciliation attempts, unable to understand why I wouldn't just fix this for everyone's sake. I didn't answer any of them. I had lived too long trying to earn love and respect from people determined to see me as lesser. I was done begging for a place at their table. Instead, I returned to my work with renewed focus. The marketing agency, where I served as creative director, was in the middle of pitching a major campaign for a local craft brewery's national expansion. I threw myself into the project, channeling everything into building concepts that reflected genuine Boston character, not the sanitized Beacon Hill version, but the gritty, diverse energy of neighborhoods like Dorchester, where I'd grown up. "There's something different about you," noted my colleague Zach during a late-night brainstorming session. "You seem, I don't know, more confident?" I considered this as I pinned another mock-up to our concept board. I think I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. My friends began noticing the change too. I was smiling more, laughing easier. The tension that had become a permanent fixture in my shoulders began to dissolve. For the first time in years, I felt myself walking taller, speaking more freely, no longer constantly calculating how my words might be twisted and reported back to Lorraine. One evening, about 2 weeks after the letter had been delivered, I received an unexpected visitor at my Seaport apartment. The concierge called up, "Ms. Mitchell, there's a Ms. Prescott here to see you." My heart raced momentarily before the concierge added, "Melanie Prescott." I considered turning her away, but curiosity won out. "You can send her up." I opened my door to find Melanie standing there, looking distinctly un-Prescott-like. Her normally perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a Northeastern University sweatshirt. The confident poise she typically carried was nowhere to be seen. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I stepped aside, letting her enter but maintaining my guard. My apartment was still sparsely furnished. A couch, coffee table, and dining set were the extent of my living room. Large windows showcased the harbor view, making the space feel larger than it was. Melanie stood awkwardly in the center of the room, taking in her surroundings. "Nice place," she offered. "Thanks. What do you want, Melanie?" She flinched slightly at my directness. The old Sarah would have offered her tea, tried to make her comfortable, worked to ease the tension. The new Sarah had no interest in smoothing rough edges for Prescotts anymore. "I wanted to apologize," she said, fidgeting with the strap of her handbag. "What Mom did was inexcusable, and I should have said something." I crossed my arms. "Why didn't you?" "Because..." She hesitated, then seemed to deflate slightly. "Because that's not how it works in our family. We don't contradict Mom. Ever. Even when she's wrong." "That sounds healthy," I said dryly. Melanie let out a small, surprising laugh. "It's not. I see that now." She paused, gathering herself. "I never asked for your house, Sarah. I hope you know that." "I would never..." "But you didn't refuse it either," I pointed out. "When Lorraine made her grand announcement, you sat there with those big, hopeful eyes. You wanted it to happen." She looked down, unable to deny it. I was raised to believe certain things were just owed to me. That sounds terrible, saying it out loud. "At least you're being honest now." Melanie moved to the window, gazing out at the harbor. "Did you know I've never lived alone?" "Not really. College was dorms with roommates chosen by Mom, then back home after graduation. The apartment in Brookline is actually Mom's investment property." I didn't respond, unsure where this was going. "I took a small studio in Jamaica Plain yesterday," she continued. "Mom doesn't know yet. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. Or it will be once I sign the lease." This was unexpected. Jamaica Plain was decidedly not a Prescott-approved neighborhood, with its diverse population and bohemian vibe. "Why are you telling me this?" Melanie turned back to face me. Because you were right to stand up to them, to us. And I think maybe I needed to see someone do it. She took a deep breath. I'm not asking for forgiveness or friendship. I just wanted you to know that what happened, it changed things. There was something genuine in her voice that I hadn't heard before. Not the polished Prescott charm, but something raw and uncertain. What about Daniel? I asked, the question I'd been avoiding even with myself. Her expression shifted. He's still at Mom's. He keeps saying he's caught in the middle, but... She trailed off. But he's not, I finished. He made his choice. She nodded slowly. I think he's always been more like Mom than he wants to admit. We stood in silence for a moment, the city noise a distant backdrop. I should go, she finally said, moving toward the door. Thank you for hearing me out. Melanie, I called as she reached for the handle. Good luck with the new place. A small smile. Thanks. I think I'm going to need it. After she left, I poured myself a glass of wine and returned to the window. The encounter had left me feeling strangely calm. Not because I believed everything Melanie said, the Prescott talent for manipulation ran deep, but because I recognized the shift in power. They were reacting to me now, not the other way around. In the weeks that followed, I learned from mutual connections that the Prescott family dynamics were undergoing seismic changes. Lorraine had canceled her summer gala, an annual tradition. That defined the Boston social calendar. Daniel had begun house hunting on his own, though whether that meant our marriage was officially over remained unspoken. Melanie had indeed moved to Jamaica Plain and taken a position at a small nonprofit legal center instead of the corporate firm Lorraine had arranged. I returned to my brownstone occasionally to check on things, always feeling a mix of nostalgia and resolve when I walked through those familiar rooms. I hadn't decided whether to sell it, rent it out, or eventually move back in. For now, it remained in trust, secure and symbolic of everything I had built on my own. My life developed a new rhythm. Work flourished as our brewery campaign won. Industry recognition. I joined a rowing club that practiced on the Charles River at dawn, finding unexpected peace in the synchronized movement and early morning mist. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my years of trying to fit into the Prescott world. Lorraine and her circle. They became a quiet chapter I no longer needed to reopen. They had made their choice, and now they had to live with it. Months passed, and the scars, both physical and emotional, began to fade. The burn marks on my neck and chest healed, leaving only the faintest pink traces that would eventually disappear completely. The emotional wounds took longer, but they too gradually lost their sting. I didn't forget the humiliation, the hot coffee on my face, or the silence that followed it. But I didn't carry it as a weight anymore. Fall arrived in Boston with its usual spectacular show. The trees along Commonwealth Avenue turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the air took on that distinctive New England crispness. I had always loved autumn in Boston, and this year it felt especially significant. A season of transformation, of letting go. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in October, I made a decision that had been brewing for weeks. I called Alan and asked him to start the divorce proceedings. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, though I knew he'd been expecting it. "Completely," I replied. "It's time." The paperwork was straightforward. Massachusetts was a no-fault divorce state, and since Daniel and I had no children and had kept most of our finances separate, there wasn't much to untangle. The brownstone remained in my trust, untouchable. My seaport apartment had started to feel like home, filled with new furniture I'd selected, and art from local galleries that Madison had introduced me to. Daniel received the papers at his mother's house, where he was still living, a fact that said everything about our marriage. He called immediately, his voice a mixture of anger and panic. Divorce? Just like that? Without even trying to work things out? What exactly would we be working out, Daniel? I asked calmly. Your mother's control over our marriage? Your unwillingness to stand up for me? The fact that you sat silently while she assaulted me? She apologized for that, he protested. And I've apologized too. How many times do you need to hear it? I closed my eyes, suddenly tired of the circular conversation. Words aren't the issue, Daniel. Actions are. And your actions have consistently shown where your loyalty lies. That's not fair, he said, his voice hardening. You never tried to be part of the family. You always kept yourself separate. Because your family never wanted me. They wanted what I had. The silence that followed told me he couldn't deny it. The papers are fairly standard, I continued, keeping my voice even. I think you'll find the terms reasonable. Your attorney can contact Alan if there are any questions. After we hung up, I stepped out onto my balcony and took a deep breath of the crisp fall air. There was a finality to the moment that felt right, like closing the cover on a book I'd finished reading. The ending wasn't happy in the conventional sense, but it was honest. And after years of pretense, honesty felt like its own kind of victory. The divorce process moved forward with surprising smoothness. Daniel, perhaps realizing the futility of fighting, agreed to the terms with minimal negotiation. By Thanksgiving, it was nearly complete. I spent the holiday with my parents at their modest house in Dorchester, where I'd grown up. My father, a retired postal worker, made his famous deep-fried turkey, while my mother, who had worked as a nurse at Boston Medical Center for 30 years, prepared all the traditional sides. The familiarity of it was comforting. The same faded family photos on the walls, the same wobbly kitchen table we'd gathered around for countless meals. "How are you really doing, sweetheart?" my mother asked, as we washed dishes together after dinner, my father and younger brother engrossed in a Patriots game in the living room. I considered the question carefully. "I'm good, Mom. Actually good, not just saying it." She studied my face with the perceptive gaze that had helped her assess patience for decades. "You look good. More like yourself." "I feel more like myself," I admitted. Like I've been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to breathe. She nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. My parents had met Lorraine only twice, once at the wedding and once at an uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner years ago. They had seen right through her polished veneer to the condescension beneath. They'd never said, "I told you so," though they certainly could have. "You know," my mother said, handing me a plate to dry, "I always thought you'd outgrow that big house of yours. Not because it was too large, but because it never seemed to fit you right." "What do you mean?" "You bought it when you were trying to prove something. To yourself, to the world. That you'd made it. That the girl from Dorchester could own a piece of Beacon Hill." She smiled gently. "But you've never needed a fancy address to show your worth." Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind as December arrived, bringing with it swirling snow and holiday lights throughout the city. She was right. The brownstone had been a symbol of achievement, but also a defense mechanism. Brick-and-mortar proof that I belonged in spaces where people like Lorraine made me feel I didn't. That realization led me to my next decision. I called a realtor I trusted and put the brownstone on the market. It sold quickly, despite the winter season typically being slow for real estate. The buyer was a young surgeon moving from Chicago, ironically a woman who reminded me somewhat of myself 10 years earlier, determined to claim her space in the city. I didn't tell the Prescotts about the sale. They learned about it the way most Boston society news traveled, through the grapevine. Madison's brother overheard Lorraine discussing it at a Christmas charity event, apparently stunned that I would throw away such a valuable asset. "She doesn't get it," I told Madison when she relayed this to me. "She never will." "What will you do with the money?" Madison asked as we shared mulled wine at the holiday market in Faneuil Hall, surrounded by twinkling lights and the scent of pine. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace that had been years in the making. "I'm starting a foundation." The Sarah Mitchell Foundation for First-Generation Professionals launched in January. Its mission was simple but powerful, providing mentorship, networking opportunities, and emergency housing assistance to young professionals from working class backgrounds who were trying to establish themselves in competitive fields. The kind of support I wish I'd had when navigating the often exclusionary world of Boston's professional circles. I used part of the proceeds from the brownstone sale to secure a modest office space in downtown Crossing. We started small, just me, a program director, and 2 part-time staff. But within months, we had partnered with local universities, businesses, and community organizations to create a vibrant network of support. My marketing background proved invaluable as we built our brand and messaging. The foundation quickly gained attention, not just locally but nationally, as we addressed a gap that many recognized but few had tried to fill. At our first major fundraising event, held at the Boston Public Library, I found myself standing at a podium addressing a room full of people who believed in our mission. Some faces I recognized from my professional life, others were new connections, made through the foundation's work. Many of us know what it's like to walk into a room and immediately feel we don't belong, I said, scanning the attentive faces. To second-guess our words, our clothes, our right to be at the table. The foundation exists because talent and ambition should never be limited by where you came from, or who your family knows. As I spoke, I noticed a familiar figure slip into the back of the room. Melanie Prescott, looking decidedly un-Prescott-like. In a simple black dress, her hair cut into a short bob that Lorraine would surely disapprove of. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Later, as guests mingled over cocktails, she approached me. "Congratulations," she said simply. "This is important work." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised to see her. "How are things at the legal center?" "Challenging, underfunded, exactly what I needed." She smiled, a real smile without the practiced Prescott polish. "I'm learning who I am without my mother's script." "That's no small thing," I acknowledged. "No, it's not." She hesitated before adding, "Mom and Daniel don't know I'm here. Well, you know." I did know. The divorce had been finalized months ago, but the emotional severance from the Prescott family had been more complete than any legal document could capture. "How are they?" I asked, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "The same. Mom's planning her summer gala again. Daniel's dating someone new, another Caroline from Wellesley, cut from the same cloth as all moms approved. Candidates," she shrugged. "The wheel keeps turning." But it had stopped turning for me. I had stepped off that particular wheel and found solid ground. One spring day, almost a year after the infamous brunch, I walked past my old brownstone. It had changed. New, curtains in the windows, a different color on the front door. But I felt no pang of loss, no sense of what might have been. It was just a building now, part of a past that had shaped but no longer defined me. I didn't forget the humiliation, the hot coffee on my face, or the silence that followed it, but it had become something else. Fuel for a fire that burned brighter and warmer than Lorraine could have ever imagined when she tried to extinguish my spirit. They had tried to break me for not giving them my house. But in truth, I was the one who had built something they could never buy. Strength forged from betrayal, and a future that no longer included them, but expanded far beyond what any of us had imagined possible.